Hello to everybody joining me. I'm Erin, and welcome to the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. The name should give it away, but I'm here to educate, encourage, and entertain families and teachers who live and work with neurodivergent family members, friends, and students. And yep, you guessed it, my primary location for education is virtual. Sometimes we all just need a little more community, and we benefit from having people in our lives who understand how we live, how we work, and what our minds are consumed with daily. We just need support and encouragement within that space. If you're here, welcome to our community. Thank you for joining us again on the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. We've had such an amazing response to the last several podcasts where we've done a deep dive on dyslexia, Orton-Gillingham, the other dyslexia curriculums, as well as executive function skills. In our last podcast, we started our deep dive into learning about executive function skills. What are they? Where do they come from? Who has them? Have you ever heard of the term executive function or executive function skills? Whether you've heard this term or not, I can guarantee that you have used your own executive function skills today, probably within the last hour or even the last few minutes. So who has executive function skills? Everybody. However, they are often impacted by neurodivergence like ADHD, autism, a learning disability, or even a traumatic brain injury. Executive function skills are often called the CEO of the brain. We call them that because ultimately they control all of these other little skills that we do. And I shouldn't even say little skills, all of the skills that we use to function on a daily basis, whether that's academic and school or life and work and home and organization. But before we begin, be sure to follow this podcast on whatever major podcast platform you use, and also like and follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram as Erin Luchterhand Coaching, and you can access a wide variety of information on our website, erinluchterhand.com, or email us. I'll make sure that I input all of this information into the description of this podcast. Executive function skills are higher level cognitive skills that help people manage tasks, solve problems, and adapt to new situations. They include working memory, planning, and regulating emotions. Formed in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the very front forehead part of the brain, executive function skills also include planning, prioritizing, organization, attention, working memory, impulse control, task initiation, emotional regulation, flexibility, self-monitoring, and metacognition. We plan to do a deep dive into all of these executive function skills over the coming weeks. So if you heard one and you're not quite sure what it means, make sure to check out future episodes where we'll do a deep dive into all of these different areas. EF skills, or executive function skills, don't just apply to one area of our lives. We need these skills across the board. And often, very often, neurodivergent individuals struggle with these skills. In fact, these challenges can be labeled as executive dysfunction. When therapists or specialists go to diagnose something like ADHD, they are looking at an executive dysfunction. That's one of the qualifications or one of the components and things that they investigate when they look to see if somebody has ADHD, because it's that impactful. In this week's podcast, we are going to focus on the executive function skill of organization. We're starting here specifically because there is a clear example or examples of how organizational skills can impact students and adults in a variety of settings, including school, home, and work. I'm also going to be providing some specific examples of how support in these areas can be helpful and specific ideas of what you can do to try to support these areas. Now, I'm going to preface that with Everything is trial and error. What works for me may not be the best fit for what works for you. So these suggestions are not a one size fits all, it's going to work suggestion. However, these suggestions are rooted in experience, in education, in training, and they're suggestions that might help with organization skills. Now, I also want to mention that oftentimes an executive function coach can be really valuable in supporting your students with these skills. Or if you're an adult, supporting you with these skills. We don't just outgrow our ADHD, it just presents differently because we have different adult responsibilities. So if you do need support in these areas, contact Erin Luchterhand Coaching and we will set you up with an executive function coach that can help walk alongside you and support you in these areas, tailoring the support to meet your specific needs. Now let's get back into organization. In the context of executive function skills, organization refers to the ability to arrange and manage one's thoughts, materials, and activities to achieve goals efficiently and effectively, which is a crucial skill for things like planning, time management, and task completion. It's also really important for learning management, things like organizing information and materials to facilitate learning and retention. Now, before we get into the suggestions on how to support organization, I wanted to go over a few examples of different organizational skills. So, much like we experience executive function in a variety of places in our life, there's also a variety of places and ways we use organization. First, there's physical organization. This talks about keeping a space clean, organized, having a place for everything, and keeping materials tidy. Now, we know that many of us, whether we have neurodivergence or not, can struggle with keeping space clean, doing your dishes, folding your laundry, putting things away. But oftentimes in neurodivergence, it goes beyond that. I've lost my homework. I don't know where I put this thing. I can't find my keys all the time. So physical organization can be really impactful, but we also have mental organization, and this is half the battle when it comes to things at school. Organizing thoughts, ideas, and information to facilitate clear communication and problem solving, or to explain something, to process through what you're learning and what you're reading or what you want to communicate in writing. It's the ability to organize your thoughts and to communicate them clearly. And then there's also strategic organization. Now, this kind of bleeds into planning and prioritizing, but it talks a lot about prioritizing tasks, creating schedules, breaking down larger projects into smaller, manageable steps, or if you're a special educator or a parent, chunking tasks. So there's a little bit of organization that we use there, that strategy. Now let's look at how organization impacts our students in school. Now I talk about its impact across life, at home, in the workplace if you're an adult, but I work with a lot of students and we talk with a lot of parents who have students who struggle in this area. So I'm going to kind of focus this part of the podcast on students in the academic world. Now we often think of organization in that physical sense, right? Maybe my student has a messy desk or a messy locker or their backpack's a mess. And that can be very impactful. However, it's not just that messy locker. We have to focus on the thought process and organization of thoughts. And this can be really impactful in different academic skills. Certain subjects require the ability to organize thoughts more than others and to retain that information. Specifically, I see this impact mostly in math, in reading comprehension, and in writing. Now, those skills impact every subject. If you're struggling with reading comprehension, then social studies or history might eventually become a challenge for you. Or reading literature might become a challenge for you. If you're struggling with organization, then completing a word problem in math and reading comprehension too. So reading comprehension impacts math. But if you're struggling with organization, then following the steps needed to complete a math problem, that can be a challenge. Writing is a primary challenge that I often see in my neurodivergent students, they struggle with the organization of writing. Organization uses another executive function, kind of so like these are coworkers, which is called the working memory. This is the ability to hold information in the brain long enough to use it. Think of it like a sticky note in the brain, except everybody's sticky note is a different size. For our neurodivergent learners, oftentimes this sticky note is a little smaller, and it impacts the ability to retain and organize information. So if a student has a smaller sticky note, then they're holding less information in their brain at a time, because once that sticky note is full, nothing else is fitting on that sticky note unless you completely rip it off and start new. But this is where actual sticky notes, or just notes in general, can come in really handy. I love for my students to take notes or to do a brain dumping exercise where they're getting all of the thoughts out of their brain and onto paper, because the physical act of writing it down, maybe even a Google Doc, it acts as an extended working memory. Your brain doesn't have to hold that information anymore because it's on paper or it's on a Google Doc or it's somewhere written down. And so I don't have to hold it in my brain anymore, but I'm not going to forget it, because at any moment I can look at that paper and I can remember. Let's use writing as an academic area where organization often needs support. Our students struggle with organization and writing. They struggle with organization in communicating their thoughts in a structured and organized way. When they're asked to write, they may put random thoughts down or go on a written tangent about what they remember. Or perhaps they think, oh, that's right, I remember this one fact, I'm going to write that down. And oh, that's right, I remember another random fact, I'm going to write that down too. But they struggle to complete that 3 to 5 paragraph essay or that summary. Maybe they struggle to communicate their opinion, or they're working on a persuasive essay and they struggle to put their thoughts in an organized way. We can help our students by providing a very detailed step-by-step outline and deliberately walking them through that writing process. My favorite way of doing that is really slowing the process down for our students, chunking it up so that they're viewing it one step at a time and not getting overwhelmed by the whole process all at once. The first thing I have them do is what I call a brain dump. Oftentimes this is called a brainstorming session, but I want them to get every thought out of their head and onto paper. Whether it relates to the topic or not, I want their brain to kind of clear out. So I often give them space, whether it's paper or sticky notes or Google Doc, and I said, write it all down. It doesn't matter if you're going to use it later or not. It doesn't matter if it's a good idea or not. Essentially, this is the act of clearing out your working memory, clearing out the thoughts in your brain, and getting them on paper. I don't want my students writing completely random stuff if it's not related to the assignment, but if it's distracting them and it's jumbling their brain, then get it out. But this is also a great opportunity for them to write down ideas on what they want to say. They brain dump for that process. Here's what I remember. Here's what I know. Here's what I want to write about. Now, sometimes it's going to be beneficial for students to go back and kind of look at the chapter again and say, oh, that's right. I remember this happened. And they can always do more research, but this is the opportunity for them to clear their brain and get all of their thoughts out of their brain while also getting ideas for their essay or for their writing. Once they've completed that brain dump, I give them a highly structured outline. And when I say highly structured, I mean the outline is for every single sentence that they need to write in that essay. So for example, I label every paragraph. Let's say we're going to do a 5-paragraph essay. I label the first one and I provide the outline for them, at least to start. That first paragraph is labeled introduction paragraph. And then I say introduction sentence, colon, enter down, detail sentence, detail sentence, detail sentence, transition sentence. I want them to put everything in that order. And then I do the same for their body paragraph 1, 2, and 3 and their conclusion. Every sentence has 5, or every paragraph has 5 sentences. And of course you can adjust if you need to. Sometimes we have, 4 sentences and sometimes we have 6. But in general, that is the outline that I give my students. Many times they feel comfortable with writing the sentence down, but I do tell them, I just want your thoughts on the outline. If you can't quite get to the point where you're ready to form a sentence here in this outline, that's okay. I want you to give me a thought, the idea, the content. Pull it from your brain dump and say, this is what I'm going to talk about here in this paragraph. This is what this sentence is going to talk about. Now, many times it'll help students process through what to write if we give suggestions or if they write it in a sentence, right? So in this activity, they're going to spend a significant amount of time because they have to process through their information, weed out their ideas, and start to organize their thoughts. So it's almost like a fill in the blank format for my students to input the information. And oftentimes, especially as we're getting started, I am working on this directly with them. I'm asking them slightly leading questions. I'm guiding them through the process. And then, over time, I'm pulling back a little bit and I'm allowing them more independence as they've learned the process. But plan on a significant amount of time working on this outline. However, once they have this outline, they have the content and they have the organization to complete the essay. What you're going to do after that is you're going to turn it into a first draft. Now, if your students have worked on creating sentences within that outline, it's a little bit easier because then all you do is remove the outline format and, delete the extra lines to create the paragraph. And then you're going to go through and do the editing process. If during the outline they haven't quite formed those sentences yet, that's okay. Your next step now is to walk them through that process and say, okay, paragraph 1, your introduction paragraph, here's what you wanted to say. How can we write that in a complete thought? And then you're going to work on that writing process from that step. Okay, so it just really depends on the level of writing and the writing structure your students have, and you can meet them where they're at. Once they have that first draft formed, you're going to have them go through it and edit. And oftentimes, as a way to gauge their skill set with editing, I will have them go through and edit it first, and then we'll walk through it together. And I'm looking for capitalization, punctuation, spelling, but I'm also looking for I'm looking for organization, which they should have because they did the outline, right? That's that main part of the outline. But I'm also looking for understanding. So I use the acronym CUPS: capitalization, understanding, punctuation, and spelling. That understanding component often takes the longest when you're editing, because you are asking your students to evaluate their own writing and determine whether or not it makes the most sense or if there's a way that they can adjust it to make even more sense for their reader. You're asking them to take on the perspective of the reader a little bit. So they have to kind of pull themselves out of the writing that they've been so immersed in. So sometimes this editing process needs to have a little gap between that first draft and that edit. So if you finish the first draft in one session and then you come back to another session and you edit, that's a nice break. Their brain has had a break and they're able to look at it a little bit differently. So that's just a little suggestion there. But as much time as you're going to spend on the outline, probably the most amount of time in the process will be spent on the outline. Students are going to be amazed at how much easier that first draft ends up being when they have that massively detailed outline already set to go. I've had students, as we're working on the outline, going, man, why are we doing all of this work? This is so much work to get this in here. And then I said, okay, now let's write your first draft. And they're like, whoa, that was fast, because their outline was so detailed and they had all of that information. Now, I'm going to reiterate that this is something that's going to need some support as your student gets working on it. But you're supporting, in a lot of ways, the disability or the neurodivergence, because that organization part is a challenge. You are stepping in and being their executive function skills for a short period of time so that their brain can learn how to be their own executive function skills. If you are a parent or an educator and you work with neurodivergent students, or you have a neurodivergent child and you have tips and tricks and strategies for organization within writing, or a curriculum you love that really walks their students through organization and writing, I would love to know. Feel free to comment on our social media posts, send me an email, reach out to us, and we can feature that information and those suggestions in upcoming podcasts. I think this is a beautiful opportunity for our community to come together and say, hey, that's a great strategy, but here's also what works for me, so that we can continue to learn from each other and collaborate for the betterment of all of our students. Organization in spaces. Now we're going to jump to the physical aspect of organization. Backpacks, lockers, our bedrooms, clean laundry even. This is something that I struggle with. There are several strategies that can help in these particular areas, but one thing that I think is important to remember is that sometimes simple is best. We get creative, we like to try new things, but oftentimes coming back to the simple format is the best strategy for our students in these areas. Again, this is where you use a little trial and error. You might find tools and supports that work well for student A, but they don't work as well for student B. We've got to be thinking of structured, albeit creative, ways to support our students all the time, because our students, our children, are so different from one another. So I'm going to offer you a few ideas that have worked for me and worked for my students before. Perhaps you can include these in your trial and error work with your students. And I don't mean that we trial and error work with all of our students and it's not planned and structured and effective. All I mean by that is you have to figure out the right tools for each student. And so perhaps some of these will be the right tools for your students. The first thing that I recommend for my students struggling with organization is a planner. You need to know what to expect and when to expect it. So determine with your students or with your child what kind of planner will work best for them. Is it going to be a paper planner? Do they like the vertical layout, the horizontal layout? Do they prefer a Google Calendar? Would they rather have a to-do list? Maybe a short little to-do list with a due date next to it. Personally, I prefer that vertical paper planner, and I'm going to write something down on the day that it's due, not the day it's assigned. So these are things you want to process through with your student or your child when you're doing a planner. Set that expectation in the beginning and be consistent with that expectation. If you find over time something's just not quite right with this planner, that's when you evaluate, okay, does a different format work better? Should I try digital? What's the hiccup? And how do we pivot from here? But I would hesitate to do that right away, because sometimes the neurons in our brain just need a little time to connect and catch up with something new or a new strategy. So give it some time, but then be flexible over time to make some adjustments as you need to. It can also be helpful to enlist the support of a teacher or staff member to double check that written plan or double check that planner. If your child has a 504 or an IEP, this is something that can be requested in that IEP as an accommodation, or that 504. It's one thing to say, okay, fifth grade child, here's your planner, write down all of your assignments. I'm sending you to school with a planner, and then they come home and there's nothing written in them. Well, because throughout the day, their brain isn't focused on this organization piece. They're not thinking, I have got to use my planner, as soon as they get to school and they get distracted with something else. And so to have a staff member or a teacher on board at the school to kind of get them going at the very least and have that layer of accountability. Hey, I'm going to check your planner at the end of the day before you go home and make sure you have everything written in it. Or I'm going to check your planner at the end of every class. But you definitely want to have that plan set up in advance. One thing we learn is that the best laid plans sometimes fail because we're not in the moment with our students all of the time. And so that's why it's nice to have an aware teacher or an aware staff member at school who can kind of just be aware of these student needs and say, hey, don't you have this new planner? Let me see it. How's that going? Because your student will likely intellectually understand the plan as you're talking to them, but then because of the way their brain works and getting into their day, they're probably going to be so distracted that it doesn't come back up, and kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing might happen. That's happened to me before. I'm sure it's happened to you. And so even as we process and we coach our neurodivergent students on executive function skills, oftentimes they'll get that intellectual component of it. It will make sense to them in that moment as they're processing with you. But then as they go about their day and they experience life and distraction and interest and conversation and the busyness of getting from one class to another, and the cognitive load of learning their academic classes, they might forget the planner, or they might forget these other tools that they have. So to have a teacher or a staff member aware and on board, and if they have an IEP, have it embedded in the IEP, can be really, really helpful. Once home, the parents can review the planner with the children or the student, or perhaps an older sibling can look at it with them. Again, for that layer of accountability. I'm out of school. School homework can be out of sight, out of mind. So this is a responsibility that I would probably put on the parent to ask the student about. And then it will become habit over time. But this is something that I would want the parents to say, hey, how did your planner go today? Let's check it to see what you've got to work on after school. And of course, long term, we don't want to become our children's executive function skills, because that then impacts them into adulthood. You want your students and your children to be able to learn these skills and to embrace these skills and to work on these skills as they get older, so that they can be more independent as they get older and into adulthood. However, they're not ready when they're young, and they need that support. So you're developing these skills at whatever age they are. And we need to provide these layers of support and then gradually peel back those layers over time as our students can increase in this independence. Now, I mentioned a few podcasts ago, and I think it's worth repeating. Some recent studies have shown that in individuals with ADHD, their executive function skills are often 1/3 of their age behind. So their development in executive function is definitely developing slower, and it's behind their same age peers. So for example, if you have a 10-year-old, their executive function skills are likely that of a 6 to 7-year-old, right? Even younger, if you have a 6, 7, 8-year-old, their executive function skills are going to be that of a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old. And when you get older, this one's kind of scary to me. If you have a 21-year-old, their executive function skills will be that of a 14-year-old. So it's hard for these skills to totally catch up unless they have intervention, unless they have regular coaching and self-awareness. I think that's a massive key point, is that our students need to have self-awareness around these needs that they have and these challenges that they have, as well as the incredible strengths that they have as well. Our neurodivergent students and children are incredibly gifted. And so I think it's important, while we talk about these challenges, that we also encourage them in their areas of strength. But I digress a little bit and get on my soapbox for a moment. I want to talk about one more strategy that has worked with a client of mine, a former client who has ADHD, and she would get very frustrated with homework after school. This is an elementary age student. She was highly intelligent, an avid reader. She would be reading books well above her age, and she loved long novels. However, she was struggling in school. She was struggling with organization in her writing, and she really hated coming home and doing homework. When she was done with school, she wanted it to be out of sight, out of mind. And so she would get frustrated in the evening when she had homework to do, because she felt like she lost time. She was planning to do what she wanted to do, which was likely read her novel, kind of get lost in that imagination. And so one of the strategies we worked on was to assume that she has homework until she didn't. So I love what her parents did. I think this is a great strategy for her, and I'm going to suggest it to you to try. They got her a clear folder because, again, organization, she would lose her homework. She couldn't keep track of it. So anytime she got an assignment in class, she would put that assignment in the clear folder, and that clear folder lived in her backpack. When she got home, it was evident to anybody that opened her backpack that she did or didn't have homework in that clear folder. She didn't have to go searching for it. It was there. Now, we worked on that mindset of assume you have homework until you don't. Because if you go home thinking, man, I get the whole evening, and then all of a sudden you get homework dumped on you, then yeah, you feel like you lost out. And that's frustrating. But if you go home and you assume that you have homework until you don't, then it feels like you gain time. So if my mindset is, yeah, I'm going to go home and I have homework. I just do. You go home and you check your folder and there's nothing there. Awesome. Bonus time. And that strategy worked really well for her. And it was that mindset shift that she worked hard on and her parents worked hard on with her that worked really well. The last strategy I'm going to share with you is a strategy called body doubling. So I don't know if you're familiar with body doubling, if you've ever heard this term before, but body doubling is a technique where somebody works on a task while another person is present, acting as a silent accountability partner or a source of support and encouragement. Now, this body double really doesn't have to do anything except to be present. The primary goal is for the individual with neurodiversity that's using the body double to improve their focus, their motivation, their productivity by leveraging the presence of another person to reduce distractions and increase that accountability. They don't actively participate in the task, but their presence serves as a reminder to stay on track and help individuals overcome procrastination or difficulty starting tasks. So this can be really beneficial for somebody that struggles with that initial task initiation. The best part is that the body double can just come and be present. They don't actively participate in the task. They can come, have a cup of coffee on your couch, read a book, or just chit chat while the individual with neurodiversity completes the task. This is specifically helpful for individuals with ADHD, and it does help in a few areas, including improved focus, enhanced motivation, increased accountability, and better time management. And I find that really fascinating. Again, it goes back to that core benefit of providing a structured environment and a sense of accountability. It helps keep us on task. So if you haven't tried body doubling, this might be something to include in the supports that you're providing or you're receiving for individuals. I would be curious to know the benefit of body doubling for elementary, middle, and high school students compared to body doubling for adults. That conversation about body doubling focused quite a bit on maybe cleaning the house or starting a home-based task or a work-based task. But I would be curious to know the benefits of starting a school-based task. Perhaps it's simply that you, as the parent, are sitting at the counter reading a magazine or reading a book while your child starts their homework. That would be really interesting to compare the benefits of school to home to work in regards to body doubling. Over the next upcoming podcasts, we are going to do a deeper dive into some other specific executive function skills. I'm curious what you would like to hear next. We're going to talk about what they are, how they impact, and some more research-based supports that can help. Today was organization. What skills would you like me to discuss next? We'll also discuss how and why specific strategies help and the benefits of EF coaching. If you have a child, student, or you yourself are neurodivergent, remember, we don't outgrow our ADHD or autism when we graduate high school. It just looks different. Then I hope you follow along and reach out if you have questions about coaching. Erin Luchterhand Coaching is a mission and vision-driven small business designed to support you. As a team, we provide virtual intervention and education to break down barriers and create access to research-based tools that empower neurodivergent individuals. By addressing challenges specific to neurodiversity, our sessions foster growth, resilience, and self-confidence, equipping students and adults with the skills they need to thrive. We envision a world where neurodivergent individuals are empowered to embrace their unique strengths, knowing they are created on and for a purpose. Through innovative virtual interventions, we strive to build a future where every learner feels valued, capable, and confident, while fostering a shared joy in the journey of growth, discovery, and success.